A third wave of COVID-19 is sweeping EU nations. Its vaccine program is faltering, and members are turning to Russia and China for supplies of jabs. But billions of dollars of crisis funding will be handed out within months. So, will the EU emerge from the pandemic stronger or forever weaker? This is Roundtable. Hello, I'm Shuli Ghosh. The European Union has faced down crises before: the financial crash of 2008, the arrival of millions of migrants and refugees. But these events leave their mark. So how will the coronavirus pandemic change the EU? The COVID-19 crisis has been a brutal test of what the EU can deliver and what its citizens expect of it. In the early days of the pandemic, it was criticised for being reluctant to help southern European countries hardest hit by the outbreak. But by the end of the year, it had agreed on a 7-year budget and COVID recovery package worth more than $2.2 trillion. The EU also hoped to prove its value by taking charge of vaccine buying for all 27 member states. But it's been roundly condemned as being too slow, and in the first few months, a fraction of the promised inoculations have been delivered. Now, some countries, including Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic, are getting vaccines from China or Russia, while Austria and Denmark are developing a vaccine partnership with Israel. So as the EU fights the symptoms of COVID-19, will it emerge stronger or weaker when the pandemic is over? Well, joining us now from Warsaw in Poland is Wojciech Przybylski, who is Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight and President of the Board at Respublika Foundation. From London, we have Denis Macshane, who was the UK Minister of State for Europe from 2002 until 2005. And in Washington, D.C. is Dmitris Tsarouhas, Associate Professor of International Relations at Bilkent University. Gentlemen, good to have all of you here at Roundtable. Denis, let me start with you. Do you agree that the EU has been slow and disorganised in ensuring equitable access of vaccines across the bloc?
Health was always exclusively a national competence. So the Health Commissioner, a lady from Cyprus, was never a very important commissioner. I don't mean to be rude about her, but health always belonged to the nation states of Europe, and they didn't get their act together at all. They still, in many countries, haven't got their act together. I can't believe that France, with its powerful state and a single dominant president, is so far behind. Germany, legendarily the most efficient and scientific in all the European nations, in a dreadful state. So no, the European nations have done very badly. They haven't known how to coordinate, haven't known how to use the EU and the Brussels institutions to any great effect. And
no accident then that the UK has done pretty well in its vaccine rollout programme?
No, because the decision to go ahead was while the UK was still operating under EU rules. So any other country could have done the same thing. Huge difference is that in Britain there's a single not-for-profit state giant autonomous agency called the National Health Service that knows how to mobilise, knows how to spend money, knows how to put very good doctors and nurses in the front line, and there's been no messing around. And that's the NHS that's done that. Other European countries organise their healthcare differently. Some of the Nordic ones have done better than others. There's quite a lot of variety. Switzerland, for example, usually incredibly inefficient, is unbelievably inefficient when it comes to vaccinating its people. Why? Nobody seems to know.
So we've got this situation where some countries have turned to countries outside the bloc for their vaccines. Italy apparently looking at manufacturing Sputnik V in Rome. Dimitris, Greece has yet not turned to Russia or China. Does that mean Greece has faith in the way the EU is handling this?
So I think if you look at the EU average overall, Greece has been vaccinating a decent amount of people ever since the vaccination campaign began. there is currently no discussion of moving elsewhere, looking elsewhere. And I think the fundamental problem for Greece, as well as many other states, has been the way in which the European Commission has sought to coordinate the purchasing of vaccines and then allocate doses according to the population criterion. They've done this, but obviously some more doses were then left out for countries to shop around in between themselves. And some of them have been quicker. Some of them have been able to purchase the AstraZeneca vaccine, for instance, which is relatively cheaper than the Pfizer and Moderna, and they've been able to make strides forward. So for Greece, currently the campaign is still ongoing. The numbers are still very low, given the fact tourism season is going to be very significant for the Greek economy going forward. And the argument now is, of course, what to do with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which has caused so much controversy elsewhere in the EU.
Yeah, Wojciech, the Visegrad countries have taken a slightly different view. Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, they've all turned to Russia to fill their vaccine gap. What's Poland's position?
Well, Poland is, by the statements from the government, is not taking Sinopharm or Chinese products into consideration at the moment, and definitely not the Russian vaccine, at least until the moment they are approved by a European medical agency, and that is the official statement. That's sad. We also can say that in Slovakia, the purchase of Sputnik 5 or Sputnik V, no, I don't know how you should call it, a Sputnik vaccine has caused the government nearly to collapse.
That secret deal to get 2 million doses in Slovakia has caused a massive political controversy, hasn't it?
Yes, indeed. And then the Prime Minister is now being called to resign after the Minister of Health from the same party in the coalition government has already resigned as a political sacrifice for a blunder, for a secret purchase and smuggle into the country a vaccine that does not have approval of the state or EU agencies, for that matter, in terms of safety checks and procedural elements. But of course, Hungary is different. Hungary is pursuing the avenue of building up special relationship with China for quite some time. It is the most
and Russia as well, isn't it? I mean, this is what the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban says, because he has turned to Russia for the Sputnik V vaccine, and he is saying this is the only way to vaccinate more people. Let's listen to what Viktor Orban has to say.
Despite the uncertainty of European vaccine supplies, I can tell you for sure that by the end of May, we Hungarians will be able to vaccinate 3.5 million more people than in similar-sized EU country, which only relies on Western vaccines.
Wojciech, if I can come to you, Orban says this is about numbers. He's basically saying that the EU has failed to provide enough vaccines. Is he exploiting Europe's COVID-19 crisis as a weakness?
No, he is doing what he's always been doing. He's the free rider of the European Union. If you look at the numbers of what China or Russia can provide globally, these numbers are fifth in the ranking, coming after all the other so-called Western companies that he referred to, and Chinese numbers are far beyond, and these are the numbers that are being exported from the countries which do not vaccinate their own population in a similar number to what the Western countries are doing.
Well, so I can see both our other. Both our other guests are nodding at this. Let me bring them in. Denis, when it comes to looking outside the bloc for vaccines, I mean, what does this mean for the EU? Is it basically, when it comes down to it, every member for themselves?
Health, as I said, like defence, you send soldiers to die, or you take life or death decisions about your citizens, which is what the big health decisions can be. That's not going to go to a committee by a majority vote of officials in Brussels. Vladimir Putin is vaccinating nobody in Russia. I'm sure he's been vaccinated about 10 times a day, but he's using vax diplomacy to try and win a bit of influence. Viktor Orban, as Wojciech said, always plays these childish games. There's actually plenty of vaccines in Europe. We've got 4 major companies that have been approved. They set up these very fast production factories. So the vaccines are there, but the delivery mechanism.
But some countries are saying they're not getting enough vaccines, and the coronavirus pandemic is a huge problem in countries like Slovakia and some of the eastern countries, far more so than they are in some of the richer EU states.
I think it's a question about richness or wealth or not, where there was certainly some thought, and I'd really accept that point, that countries were not prepared to give all authority to the EU, to Brussels. They never are, and not accept that they couldn't vax their own people first. I don't know, I'm very interested in this Slovakian story. It seems really cloak and dagger and a bit crazy. The EU, for example, has exported 9 million vaccines to my country, the UK. I may even be a beneficiary of one of them. I'm not sure. The Pfizer one's made in Belgium. But the UK has not exported a single vaccine. And we were ahead of the field very early on, thanks to the National Health Service, not thanks to politicians, in making them back to Europe. But I do think, and I hope that I think it's a heck of a big story now. I accept that completely. But as Dmitris said, we need to look at the tourist industry, not just Greece. It's so important all over Europe, and try and drop all the objections and difficulties, allow doctors, pharmacies. My own daughter, who works for an airline, she's retrained as a vaccine jabber and will start work part-time quite soon. So that's what we really need to do. We need to mobilize the army. We need to send out special vaccine units to local areas, especially amongst communities which perhaps don't speak the native language that well, and get them vaxxed. Joe Biden's doing this in America. He's not exporting any vaccines either. He wants to give America an Independence Day presence and say, look, you got rid of Trump, and now we can be rational and scientific about vaccinating the country.
Do you agree with that, Dmitris? Let me bring Dmitris in, because you're saying that Greece is one of those that isn't looking elsewhere for vaccinations. But what is the impact of countries who are turning to Russia, to China within the EU? And is there a race on to get as many vaccines, as many bigger population vaccinated as possible, to the detriment of the cohesiveness of the EU?
I think that Denis is absolutely right, that there is fundamentally a problem in Europe of distributing and administering the existing vaccination doses which are there. Because in terms of purchasing, what Europe has tried to do was set up a coordination body with health officials from each EU member state, make sure that they have the agreements in place, both with Pfizer, BioNTech and with Moderna early on, and then make sure they distribute those properly to different member states based on the population criterion, as I mentioned before. Now, that there are clearly bottlenecks here, there are clearly problems in terms of the distribution, and member states have had the capacity to make their own individual purchasing choices, if you like, based on the existing 4 vaccines that have been approved. Some of them have fared better than others. But when it comes to the issue of how do you engage with the rest of the world, I think there is a clear danger here. It's called vaccine nationalism, and it's really about utilizing the politics, and in particular the politics of populism, for the purposes of domestic consumption. This is a pandemic. This is a world crisis. Everyone needs to be able and get a vaccine at some point in time. Certain countries have been able to organize themselves better than others. And I think what is happening now is that domestic pressure is piling up, precisely because we start having the economic data about the consequences of the pandemic. And going back to the point about tourism that Denis also mentioned before, it's not only Greece, as you rightly said. The OECD has now published the figures showing that the biggest problem within the European Union and the Eurozone in particular, in terms of economic contraction, is to be found in Spain, France, Italy, and Greece, Southern Europe. And my worry is we may end up, once hopefully this whole thing is over, repeating the north-south cleavages that the Eurozone crisis brought about. This is the last thing that the European Union can afford.
Actually, that is a great point to take us to talking about the economy. As we know, the EU successfully agreed a 7-year budget, a European financial package, including a big COVID recovery fund. Dmitris, is Greece happy with that package?
So the amount which has been potentially allocated to Greece through the Next Generation EU package and the multi-annual financial framework amounts to about 32 billion euros. Now, for an economy which is currently the size of about 170 billion euros, that's a sizable chunk of money. However, it is very important to keep in mind two things. First, the money needs to be spent and it needs to be administered through the national plan that the Greek government will submit to the Commission these days. In fact, the plan for 2021 must have already been submitted. So the question then is take up. Is the Greek public administration system in a position to process those files and to process those applications in order to get the money? And secondly, the second challenge is those national action plans need to be built around the priority areas of the European Union, which are essentially green growth and digital Europe, the digitalization of the economy. Now, we all know that countries like Greece have suffered in the past from this. And so there is a question of both competence on the one hand and also being able to match national priorities for growth going forward with the EU priorities. So to answer your question, the sum is sizable, and it's very significant that the EU has finally moved to a process of actually assisting states through grants instead of exclusively loans as in the past. But the devil is in the detail, and time is running out to make sure that this money can actually be channeled to where it's mostly needed.
Wojciech, what's the view of the Visegrad countries? Because there was a huge row, wasn't there, between the Western states and Poland and Hungary about whether to tie this recovery funding to democratic reforms, to rule of law. Do those Eastern states feel they're being treated fairly?
Well, definitely Poland has no reason to complain, neither Hungary. And to be fair, the row was between those two countries and everybody else in the EU. It was to the south, Romania, and to the north, Baltic states, otherwise often called Eastern European. Slovakia and Czechia were also against Poland and Hungary in this row on this very strange thing that happened. But overall, yes, the politics, of course, is using every conflict as an opportunity. And this government, along with Hungarian government, used this opportunity for their own purposes. But overall, the governments are happy with the money. They are also happy with the prospects, except for some minority fraction in the Polish government, in fact, which says it will vote against. It will not vote in the parliament for the recovery package to be ratified, which is the most radical element of the government, and which means that the opposition will support the government in such a critical moment. So I can say that there is a bipartisan consensus on how important this recovery package is to Poland.
Yeah, and I guess that the questions now are about, as Dmitris was saying, how we go forward from here, how those funds are used. Denis, you made the point that public health is not a strong point of the EU, but when it comes to economy, this agreement was hailed as a historic agreement, and it seems to have been generally widely approved. Do you think this is going to be enough, and is it going to help bring the EU out of the economic disaster that's been caused by COVID-19?
It will help. Personally, I'm very, very suspicious when I hear the adjective historic applied to any agreement between governments who are fighting to maintain their own positions and perspectives. Look at what's happening in America. Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion injection is going to boost the American GDP by about 10-12%, according to economists. The European recovery plan and all the other financing that's now coming on stream will boost the European economy by about 6 or 7%. And I'm a little nervous that each country will have its own priorities, and they won't. A lot of them will be about filling in holes because of poor administration, lack of economic reform, lack of dynamism in the past. We're also heading into uncharted political territory. Tell me who the next Chancellor of Germany will be. Tell me if President Macron is guaranteed a successful re-election next year. We're on our 70th government since the war in Italy, and we have the inward-looking countries, if I may call them that, like Hungary and to some extent Poland, that don't want to play the European game elsewhere. And we're still lacking that economic dynamism in Europe to create the new giants, the technical giants, the industries and the firms of tomorrow that make money and employ people at decent salaries. So there's still a lot more. We're coming to the end of a long 40-year era. You might call it the era of Davos, the World Economic Forum era. And we're entering new, quite tricky economic territory with China bearing down, huge problems with Russia, and America determined to really go it alone in many respects. So I think I'm not sensing that dynamic leadership across Europe in all its capital cities that one needs.
And I think that's a good point, that all of this will lead into how people perceive the role of the EU and how well it's been perceived to do during this pandemic and what it might mean for the future of the EU. Dmitris, I wanted to put this to you. According to a recent Euronews survey, many people believe the EU didn't help their country enough during the pandemic. And in fact, in countries like Germany, the UK, more than half the respondents in the survey felt Brussels was of no help at all during the crisis. Is that going to have an impact on the European Union as we know going forward?
I think that there have been problems, and the survey you just quoted indicates precisely that. So let us recall that about a year ago, when the crisis began, many, particularly in Italy, where the scenes of Bergamo are still all vivid in our memories, I suppose, felt precisely that Europe had abandoned them. And going back to the agreement that was reached last summer, this agreement, whether it will prove historic or not, we don't know. It was definitely a step in the right direction. But what it tried to do was precisely to say that Europe is here for you, that Europe is no longer necessarily only imposing conditions on countries to behave in particular ways, but it's here to help. It's what President Macron called a Europe that protects. Now, I understand why people are suspicious, and in my own native Greece, let us be no doubt that if this program, this relief package, is not addressed in the way that it should, if it doesn't help reduce unemployment and rampant inequality in the country, the soft underbelly of Euroscepticism, which is now widespread in Greek society following the Eurozone crisis, is going to return. And this is something that the political class in Greece, but also across Europe, needs to bear in mind. This time round, I believe that Europe did try to coordinate better. There is now a central mechanism through which, for instance, the important vaccine distribution is taking place. But clearly there are problems in the way that the system works. And what citizens expect going forward is to see that Europe will protect their living standards and make sure that it will provide the leadership that, for instance, Joe Biden here in the United States has been able to provide. And on that point, I agree again with Denis. This type of dynamic leadership, the problem-solving leadership across Europe, is actually still in demand.
Wojciech, let me pick that up with you. Given how the EU has performed during this pandemic, do you agree that Euroscepticism might be on the return, that this might affect the future of the EU?
Well, this is hard to predict again. I mean, we will live and see that perhaps Euroscepticism will be on the rise again.
Definitely, well, we might be able to see for sure, mightn't we, when it comes to elections, and we see how pro-European parties do in those elections?
Well, if you look at Poland, if you look at Hungary, these anti-European countries, anti-EU governments, or what you call them, Eurosceptic, I think they're far more than skeptic about the EU. They're losing ground. So the pandemic is not helping their popularity at all, and also they're not helping how they are managing the crisis, especially given the dissatisfactory numbers in public health and also in the economy, and also at the same level that we speak about the economy, at the level of distributing money from public budgets and EU budgets, channeling them to their own people. Because, I mean, we've been living through prosperity times when since the last financial crisis, in which populists or nationalists have been exploited the EU, but riding on a wave of general prosperity across the world and in Europe as well. Now, they're going to face a difficult truth. Now they're in power, and they are going to be responsible for the misfortune and the general misfortune in the economy that is the common perception, that is the common experience of the societies.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. It's been a great discussion. Thank you very much indeed. Wojciech Przybylski, Denis Macshane and Dmitris Tsarouhas, thank you. And you can see more of that discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for TRT World Roundtable. For now, from me and all the team here, bye-bye. Thanks for watching.